things. And yes, I'm using income as a specific example here, but it's good to apply those things and why those things are important, because having income can help dictate other goals and things. Like we talked about allocating resources and those means. So those are all things too important, and breaking them down further, like what are you getting and stuff. And I know for some people this can be a little bit overwhelming and everything, but it's still important to some degree plan for this. Where do you see yourself happening? If you're making a game and you're at a job that you, a full-time job that you hate and everything, like maybe, and while this is coming into the more personal end, maybe it's worth changing something else to something else, where if your income's really low, really take a look at yourself real quick and be like, hey, look, the skill sets I have and everything, is it worth changing my job to do something else? Because then I can get X much more income, which can then feed into my other goals and objectives with the project I'm working on. Specifically, there's someone who reached out to me for some help, and when I talked to them further, I'm like, what are you doing for a job? And it wasn't anything relating to game development or anything remotely close. And he was making very little money because of this. And I'm like, dude, why don't you start looking for another job and because you're going to learn more, you can apply it to your game, and you'll make more money. And he's already on a path to do that. And that's why I bring those things down. And yes, I brought it down specifically to income in this case, but it gives you some insight in terms of how to break things down. All right. I know I went on forever here, Mustapha, about like income in terms of how it applies to me and how it could apply to other people. But like, what would you say are other areas too that would be worth projecting? Maybe closer around to projects and things along that line, and maybe to some extent, if you have any examples, how it applies to you guys.
Yeah, I mean, I think you make an excellent point. I don't know so much that I would. I think what I could speak to perhaps better than another example would be some of the approaches you should take to projecting. Attitudes and mentality you should consider as you're kind of taking that step. The first and most important of which being acknowledging that anything that you're doing, anything that you're planning for at all, needs to be living and breathing, because it is subject to change.
Yep.
There are going to be facets of your plan that are out of your control. And so having a sense of, okay, I can come back, I can revisit this, I can adapt my plan, is perhaps the most important thing, especially for someone working independently, where typically I would say our timelines are a little bit more flexible than they might be if you were working for a company, or for a larger company or something like that is really what I mean.
Yep.
Now, I also believe that as you're setting goals, acknowledging that there are, of course, some inevitables, whether you like them or not, but try to have a fun factor to your expectations. You know, like if you're going to be, if you're the type of person who's going to work a 40-hour-a-week job to maintain an income, but you're still interested in going into this field and you want to make something because it's something that matters to you, doesn't really seem to make a whole lot of sense to do anything other than what you're completely excited and passionate about. Otherwise, you know, why not just stick with the day job? But
yeah, exactly.
that's kind of the sentiment that I have, that I would hope to convey, is that you really have to maintain an open and free-form attitude about your projecting, and then you also have to acknowledge the ways in which the passion contributes to your motivation in the field. And as kind of a follow-up to the deliverables as well, making sure to set frequent checkpoints, milestones, so you can apply the evaluation to the projection.
Exactly.
It is important, I think, to take stock at like year's end. What did you do? What didn't you do? I think it's also good to do that on a smaller scale, periodically, quarterly even. Take a look back, kind of analyze the nature of the beast, so to speak, and then use that information to inform the way you go forward. If any of you are familiar with the Scrum business models, for instance, that use sprints, I would say that would be a pretty solid example of this. Um, and then also just being aware of stakeholders, which really anyone who has an investment in kind of your project, your team, whatever it may be, making sure that those people are always in the communication loop as transparently as possible with both projections and evaluations. Because that gives people an opportunity. First of all, it's in the spirit of fairness, right? If there's anyone who's investing in you, they deserve the transparency,
Right.
To be able to gauge the quality of their investment. And then also, people who are investing in you, especially in the game space, are probably pretty excited and passionate about what you're working on.
Yeah,
and
like
so
fans.
if there are resources they can provide for you to make perhaps that next quarter or whatever increment of time go smoother, that's something that might become available if you keep that line of communication open.
And another thing I'd like to add to that on your whole point with stakeholders is it helps with you setting accountability. Because the biggest thing with whether it's projections with either income or simply, the deliverables or the projects that you're working on, accountability is really important. Because, I struggle with this myself sometimes, and I'm sure all of us do to an extent, is most people in general there's inner accountability and outer accountability, right? And the one that people struggle with the most is inner accountability. We're so used between our work and other systems in place in which outer accountability is so much of the norm, and we're so used to it. And a lot of us really do well in a very structured environment, right? But if you're doing your own thing, a lot of that accountability relies on yourself. And if you don't have that ability to create that inner accountability, and that's where I struggle sometimes. In some areas I'm great, in others I'm horrible. So what I do is I know that, hey, if I have at least some type of structure in place or extra outer accountability, then I'm able to really drive forward. And I've done this in numerous ways. Actually, today I had a friend that I met up with, and we meet, I think every month or so, and he's a form of outer accountability that I have. I recently reached out to someone who's an occasional listener of the show and said, "Hey, I want you to be a form of accountability for me," and I set these. I also I hire a coach that I meet with every month as another form of that accountability. And there's numerous ways to do that, but just to give you my own personal examples, I set these things in place because I know I'm bad at them in some cases. So the inner accountability part, not so great. I can do it okay in some areas, but not. But again, accountability is important. And if you're not taking the means, as Mustapha said, making note of those stakeholders, whether they're actual investors, whether they're fans, or whether they're just other people, friends, family, mentors, whoever, to keep you on track, it's so much more important. And having someone that is familiar but still applying in kind of an outsider lens to things can open up so many doors. You can have you look at things so much differently than what you have been looking at. And then it can really give you a sense of energy and everything else to really move forward with. So again, setting that outer accountability with stakeholders and other people is, I think, huge. I know it is for me. And how to find those people, just talk to other, just network with other, become friends. Don't go out right and say, hey, can you be, unless you already have a relationship to an extent, don't go hey, can you serve as my accountability partner? Because sometimes for some people it just might be weird. But make that call when you have that relationship developed and whatnot, and then go from there. At least for me, it helps out tremendously.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree, honestly. I think that's part of why the three-man dynamic, albeit, recent happenings, as adjusting with the pandemic has been pretty difficult for us, workflow-wise. But I think having kind of a triangular structure allows us to have that outer accountability,
Yeah.
and for the nature of it to be diverse enough to help us with things that you might not expect otherwise, like game balancing and having a second pair of eyes for a specific item.
Yeah.
Uh, so whatever shape that comes in, I think I would agree. It's very, very important to have.
All right, cool. So as we kind of wrap this up, I'd love to just quickly review, basically, as you just mentioned, which is perfect, like that triangle, right? And if we were to make a triangle, this is probably the points in which it would be. It would be the one we led with today was, evaluation, taking that moment to really think introspectively. And again, like these are the questions that I go through, and Mustapha, feel free to add to this when I go through these. What have you accomplished? Like what worked out well for you? What didn't work out well? And how can you adapt to improve? I mean, these are the types of things that I'm asking when I'm applying to each area or segment of my business relating to, RenGen and obviously to indie game movement too. But those are the things I ask. And then from there, I start getting a lot of other ideas or in terms of how basically how to improve or what, and maybe some stuff in order to improve, I'm just putting some other stuff on the back burner. Those are all ways that I go about this process. Anything else you want to add to summarize?
Yeah, and then I would say personally, for me, I always like to take an approach of what was the part that you enjoyed the most, and what was the part that maybe you disliked the most. Just as a way of, because I know if there's something I have to do that I don't like doing, it's probably best for me to get to it early. So like. As far as planning for your next cycle, I think that's important information to have.
Cool. And then another one of those points, as we mentioned, was like projecting, really setting those, business goals, or just even if to some extent it's more like a personal goal for you, whatever the case may be, obviously are more focused around the business side, but, projecting what are those goals are, how are you going to hit them? Like break that down. If you can't do it yourself, then maybe it's a time to consider having, someone else and reallocating or just getting the resources and means to do that. And setting those expectations for those projects too, and making sure they're realistic too. Like when you're goal setting, it's good to think of things in terms of like a little bit of reach. Because the way I like to see it is if you give yourself a little bit, make them a little bit more of a reach. If you make them too easy, then it just won't play out as well in terms of you're selling yourself short. And then you'll probably always get in the habit of always making them too easy to obtain. And if you set a appropriate goal, you can always hit. What it does is it's putting you basically the same as what I just stated. It puts you in a comfort zone, right? You want to have that reach, because chances are if you set that goal a little bit, whether it's a certain time period to push forward to, or it's a type of project or whatever that goal may be, if you push beyond what you can do and you don't hit the reach, well, you could already be a little bit overhead than what you were comfortable with, right? So it puts you in a better position. And if you hit that reach or go beyond that, well, it helped you, allowed you to strive and work harder to hit that, right? And then if you underperform, I mean that. And it's not a failure. It's just a learning experience and being like, okay, maybe I set my expectations too high or whatever. But yeah, really getting down to projecting and figuring those things out and how they work out and stuff and going from there. Anything else, Mustapha?
No, I think you about summed it up on that one.
All right, great. And then, we talked about the evaluation, projecting, and those are big components of the planning aspect. But the last one is execution. And really that comes down to you not much other than doing it. Like a big part of like planning is great, super important. But as I mentioned earlier, if you're not executing, you're not having any momentum. It's almost like you just need to keep swimming, right? Thinking back to, what is it? Finding Nemo. Dory's character, I think, says that all the time. But anyways, but yeah, execution, just keep moving.